Hey there, class. So in this assignment, you're going to need to do a couple think alouds on what we've read so far in the Hope Chest. So we really hit think alouds hard in the month of January. So I hope those are still very familiar to you, but I wanted to just provide a quick refresher as we're beginning to do some of these occasionally again, just to get your mind thinking back to what a think aloud is. So if you remember, great readers, when they're reading, their brains are super active. They are not just reading the words, but they are thinking thoughts about those words. And it's sort of those thoughts they're thinking that help build that text base that I talked about in one of my videos last week. And so the point I want to make here is that I'm trying to coach you with these think alouds of how to think the right thoughts when you're reading. Reading comprehension is a super tricky skill. But if we can train our brains to sort of think in the correct ways, but do it in a very natural fashion, that we can become better readers. So I've got a few think alouds, or I've got a few tips about think alouds. So one common mistake that I see students do is they will go into the text and they say, you know what, I'm going to go create mental images, or I'm going to go make a synthesize information think aloud. And they really have it backwards. What great readers do is while they're reading, they think the thoughts, and then they can categorize it into its different categories. Most readers, they don't actually put them into categories when they're reading. That's just something we're doing as a class to sort of help put structure around our thinking. So while you're reading or listening to me read the Hope Chest, or even Harry Potter for that matter, I don't want you to go and say, I want to go make an inference. What I would rather you say is to notice what thoughts are in your head, and then use those thoughts to put them in one of the category. I hope that makes sense. So think the thoughts first. Just notice your thinking, because you're already thinking lots of great thoughts, and then put those into one of the categories. The second one is to use a variety of think alouds. I've noticed in class, and this is A-OK, that a lot of students gravitate towards the asking questions think aloud, and I'm fine with that. Asking questions is a great thing that great readers do. However, great readers don't just do one type of thinking over and over and over again. It's really the web. It's kind of sort of all of them working together. So I'll ask and I'll invite you, if you're someone that kind of sticks to one sort of strategy, like synthesize information or asking questions or creating mental images, when we're doing our think alouds the next few weeks, I would challenge you to try different think alouds. Try ones that are maybe not. Notice different thoughts that you typically don't usually notice. Go for the ones that are going to stretch you a little bit more. And my third tip is to think about this from the author's perspective. So great writers, they write their books in very specific ways to help make their point come across. And sometimes if we think about things from the author's point of view, that helps us understand and be able to think a little bit differently about the book. So in the Hope Chest, the author is trying to portray, it's setting up for the main conflict in the book is going to be the women's suffrage movement and the opportunity for women to be allowed the right to vote through the passing of the 19th Amendment. That's where the book's heading. And so very early on in the book, it's trying to get us accustomed to the two different ways of thinking. So you have Violet's parents, on the one hand, who are very anti women's suffrage. And then you have Chloe, on the other hand, that's like the polar opposite and very pro women's suffrage. And then she gets on the train and she meets the dying Mrs. Renwick. Now, which category do you think Mrs. Renwick falls in? Probably not the Chloe category, probably the parents category. And then she's going to go meet other people. So Violet's kind of this character in the middle that's figuring out these two worlds. And so when we think about these things from the author's point of view, that can help us, especially make some inferences and synthesize information and do some other great think alouds. So just a review of the think alouds. You can create mental images, which is what you can see in your mind's eye while you're reading. Great readers can see what's going on in the text, and that doesn't have just to be a narrative text. It can be an informational text too, that great readers are able to take what's on the page and put it in their brain and may really see it. The next one is make connections, which there's 3 types of connections you can make. You can make a connection to yourself, from your own personal life. So that's when I say, you know what, Violet's parents aren't really acting like my parents would. That's a text-to-self connection. You can make a text-to-text connection, which is where you can say, you know what, Mrs. Renwick sounds a lot like she has the same ideas as Violet's parents. That's a text-to-text connection. You can also make a text-to-world connection, like let's say you've learned about the 19th Amendment before, or you've learned about voting rights before, then you could say, oh, I have a lot of background knowledge about the 19th Amendment that's going to help me, learn more about this text. So those are the type of connections you can make. You can also ask questions, which is where you are just asking a question about the text. These questions sometimes don't get answered, but a lot of the times the text will answer it if you give it enough time. But great readers ask questions on what's going on in the text. Great readers can make inferences, and remember, inferences is probably the most important one. There's no way that an author can make every single little point they want to make through the text, and so they leave things up to the reader to figure out. So if you remember, a good inference is where you're taking something that you know, whether it's from the text or from your life or from the world, and then you're pairing that with details from the text to make a guess about something. You're making an inference of what you think might be going on. So inferences are super duper important, and so it makes great inferences. The next one is determine importance. This one, in my opinion, is one that supports all of our think alouds. Because if you're asking questions, but your questions don't really matter, they're not from important parts in the text or about important things, then the answer isn't really going to help you build understanding. Or let's say you make lots of great connections to like video games that you're playing or other things. Like those can be super helpful, but on the other hand, if they're not helping you understand important parts of the text, then they don't really matter either. So determine importance kind of supports all of them. Synthesize information is where you're putting pieces together. So remember, that can be when you learn something new and interesting in the text, or when you think one thing and your thinking gets shifted a different direction. You have a schema shift. That's synthesize information. And this one's a big one, monitor comprehension. Sometimes when we're reading, our mind starts to wander, or it gets confusing, and our comprehension starts to break down. So we can use fix-up strategies like finding out the meanings of words, going back and rereading. There's lots of fix-up strategies that we can do to help support our comprehension. So I appreciate you watching this video on Think Aloud strategies. Now go and have some great Think Alouds.